really following people with my eye and looking at faces and trying to get that split second of people exploding with emotion. In India, it's not hard. To document is really to create history. I've been doing it over 30 years. I can still remember the vitality and the wonderment the very first time I went to the villages. Feeling the huge drum that was being beaten, the music sort of came through my feet and up through my body, and I was still there when I woke up in the morning. So the villages had a really big impact on me. Many photographers have come to India, but I think that there's a certain beauty in staying around for so long and being accepted as I am in this town. I'm recording something that I'm believing in. I'm here to try to preserve what I find is beautiful, to evoke emotion in people's minds. I was invited back to London about 5 years ago to see an exhibition of London's top photographers, and I looked at all the work and thought, well, if this is what it is, I think I was lucky to be there in the 80s because there was much more stimulus. My studio because of the atmosphere. We were really trying to create a different space in which something different would come out. Growing up in Australia and then having this, you know, freedom, we could just go ballistic. I wrote a letter to my mother and I said, I could walk down King's Road without any clothes on and nobody would blink an eyelid.
There was a real body of Australians who'd left Australia and were coming to Europe. There was Nell Campbell, Sally Campbell, Jenny Key. Worldwide, in the 70s, the whole interest had moved to New York, to the Warhol, to the factory and everything, which is why I loved London, because it kind of got ignored. So great things were happening underground. So Robyn was really part of this.
Just using the body and the face as a canvas. We wanted people to stop and say, OK, is that real or is it makeup? All of the things that are easily available now on Photoshop, we didn't have then. Everything we did was done on camera, and they were the only tricks of the trade or tools of the trade we had. And the Queen, well, one could just have a field day with her.
It was a very small artistic community, so one got to know makeup artists. There was Phyllis Cohen from Canada, Richard Sharples. Oh, and then there was Richard Shah, of course, and a fellow Australian as well, a genius.
The whole thing was a collaboration. And not using traditionally trained makeup artists, you know, people who are much more into using different mediums of makeup. So that helped create very much the painterly effect. If I carefully lit them using black velvet, we could lose the top of somebody's head or pieces of their arms.
Let's say they laid siege to the body and they dissembled the body. When the body disappears under the illusionary painting and the lighting, you have to remember it's all done by hand. Scarlet is twisted like a cartoon. Bill Gibb, the great knitting designer, he is a grand Roman emperor. Sir Roy Strong, V&A director. He is an Archambaldo painting, using light of all his interests, gardening, writing, the books. The cleverness of this was they would turn the person into the person's own history.
Robyn, I think, is at heart a surrealist. There's always a little tweak involved in something there. And that's her genius, really. You'll see something that you think, oh, how did that get in there? I reckon the makeup took about 6 hours. And I'm very patient, I just sat there.
All right, well, look, you get some paper that size, and then we'll do it.
The actual photographs, Robyn is so professional and so quick. And then done. But lots of fun on the way, you know.
I ended up doing many of his half-in-half portraits, half male and half female.
I gave lots of parties in the 70s. I was known as the Andy Warhol of London then. When you're that age, you just have such a great energy. And she had a beautiful studio, Thurlow Square. Not big, but really right in the heart of things. And she was willing to experiment. We all were. You were always exchanging ideas. It was a magical time.
Michael and I met through an Australian, very interesting man called Percy Savage, who began the first PR agency in Paris. Percy rang me up and said, will you go to Brazil with Michael and shoot fashion just with a case full of clothes and free tickets? So we travelled everywhere, Jamaica, you know, Tunisia, all over the UK, and always went back to Paris. Being opposite the Victoria and Albert Museum, we had a great life there. We only had cycles, and we were so close to the park and everywhere. He was really involved in shooting video when the first VHS videos came in. I think that he loved what went on in the studio, and he liked filming a lot of it. So that lasted for 25 years. And we did many shoots together.
They spun off each other. They did do some very good stuff together. They had a very creative partnership. When I saw her working in London, it's difficult because the major personalities of designers, etc., all have a strong agenda of their own. And she had her agenda, but she did make it work. And I couldn't get over her energy to do it. I thought it was pretty groovy and way out.
I was asked to do a look with a fantastic hat. The hat was so wonderful. I was really able to get a fantastic shadow happening. Shot a Polaroid, gave it to the makeup artist and said, do all of the shadows in makeup. And then I relit it and created an illusion. So our work was always trying to do something which made people look. In about the mid-80s, after that Shadows photograph came out in the Observer magazine, it was the cover, everybody was booking me to do ads for the big makeup houses, Max Factor and Revlon and Boots, and so I became Flavour of the Month.
Beauty, wonder, courage, machine.
We were reactionary against the very straight fashion editors. Picasso or Mondrian was uppermost in our minds. I would use a piece of glass between the camera and the models. Very difficult to light, but then I had another surface upon which to spray paint or put paper or create yet another depth of illusion.
Leigh, well, he just turned up. But she photographed him very early on.
He was famous for cheekless trousers. He emerged into the club scene in about 1983. I went over there to shoot his portrait and he just whipped up his package from outer space look.
Leigh Bowery is the most ferocious critic of society. A highly inventive performance artist or reinventor of the body. He was in a rage against discrimination. So he reinvented a Krishna god as a kind of immigrant Pakistani. The crazy black and white spectacles and eye makeup, that looked to me as if he'd been looking at the sculptures of Krishna. Leigh Bowery and Robyn, two Australians in London, relatively unself-conscious and uninhibited, valuing high saturated colour, valuing light. I like to think that that is Australian.
This is the magic chair. So these are all dads?
Nice close-up,
Yes.
wide angle sort of.
Yeah.
Now, were these just on a box brownie?
No. He had a Voigtlander that I remember.
But you see, when I'm looking back through now Dad's pictures of us, that's where we got the gene from his love of photography.
She was 4 years younger than me, and Jeff was in the middle of us exactly. We used to run down to the bush. We would be gone for 8 hours. We'd swim, there were water holes. I left school when I was 15, as did Robyn.
So then I started learning photography with Grant Mudford, who was doing fabulous surrealistic pictures for Pole magazine, and a huge jolt into what I could experience. And that's Zandra and Grant, so that must be about 77. So I landed in London and wanted to work for Harry Pecinotti. So that's Harry when I started working. Who shot fashion, but he also shot arts and crafts. And he was in Thurlow Square. So I had all of these breaks where I ended up in one of those studios just opposite the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Zandra, she'd known from the beginning through Grant Mumford, who was actually a boyfriend of Zandra's. And she then started to work very deeply with Zandra.
We'd start at like 9 o'clock in the morning and heavily disguise me, and I'd be propped up so that I didn't fall asleep and move the makeup, and have a straw so I didn't ruin my lipstick. The Nefertiti image, Andrew built a wonderful helmet all in mirror. My whole face was recreated so that the camera, I don't want to say it told a lie, but it disguised all the bits so that I didn't have the nose I've got, but it was all painted out.
One of my closest friends was Divine. We got along like a house on fire. When he played these female characters on stage, he was truly brilliant. And of course, John Waters had in Pink Flamingos, and that has become a cult movie.
He was a big Anglophile, so we became firm friends. So we were a neat little family, really. We did these amazing kind of tours. We'd go to Stonehenge and Bath and Windsor. I remember I introduced him to Princess Margaret once. He almost fainted, I think. He loved tea parties and royalty. Robyn went on to document a lot of his stage shows because he became a pop star in the 70s, and she followed him around.
In having that tendency to want to document things, I do become a stable factor of the chaos going on around me. Even in nightclubs in London, I was always the silent one there. They started a club towards the end of 1979 called the Blitz. Steve Strange went on the door dressed up and said, "You can't come in unless you're dressed up." Well, it was just fabulous. It was an outlet for all of these kids to become peacocks and make up their clothes out of leftovers and old outfits. Steve Strange loved to be photographed, and so he would be in my studio at least 3 times a week in a new look. And so he did Fade to Grey, and the dripping face photographs comes from that. Now magazine said, would I create a look for the 80s? The clothes, I would say, were puritanical. The more flat I could light it, the better. Letraset onto the face.
It's very much about geometric abstraction. And it is as if there are thoughts running around, you know, in all sorts of directions. References to computer systems, a very intriguing way of interpreting a decade.
David Bowie said, "I want 6 people fully dressed in that religious kind of Gothic look." His assistant slunk into the club one night and said to Steve Strange, I want 6 people at 6 o'clock in the morning. They did that video, Ashes to Ashes. All we were wanting to do in the clubs was to document what was happening. The whole scene was really being fueled by what was happening on the street, what you could see on a newsstand, what you could see in a shop window, and what we were doing in the studios, creating spectacle.
The Alternativist world I describe as a surreal art event for all-round family entertainment. And it's based on Cruft's dog show.
First ever glimpse of our host and hostess of the world's mightiest battle of beauty, Andrew Logan's Alternative Miss World.
The first event was in 1972, and I did 12 since then. It has cabaret, and it's a thing about transformation. You can transform yourself from a human being into a washing machine. I come as the host and hostess, split down the middle.
Welcome to the Alternative Miss World 1986, Miss Bucket.
And Robyn photographed the event.
Extraordinarily fascinating carnivalesque costumes made from plastic bags, the most elaborate crinolines, anything really.
But backstage, it was just mayhem. They were competing against each other, either in front of my camera or in being able to tolerate the most booze or drugs. And so the whole atmosphere was absolutely just madness.
She documented all the fashion shows, she did the front of house. She was dynamite, Robyn. She'd go back to the dark room and she'd be processing all these photographs, and then she's off again to the next shoot, and amazing, this energy. And then, of course, there was Vivienne Westwood. She worked for Vivienne.
The whole look became a huge, big, new romantic pirate look for the 80s.
Robyn's drive in documentation, I would say, it's always been there. You know, when she chose to do Zandra's book, Thurlow Square had a balcony, a little balcony where her and Michael slept. So she photographed these costumes from above. She made them look exquisite, like butterflies.
We put together the book, recording all of my work, my drawings, and all of the garments out flat, so they're recorded for posterity in a way that no other designer has had their work recorded. In 1980, Rajiv Sethi came to me and said, I'm going to do the first Festival of India in London, and we want you to work with the Indian crafts and see what you can develop. I went on a trip to India, and it was so spectacular and so amazing.
She told me about the Blue Gods, and she had lots of those postcards that you buy on the street, and she wanted to look a bit like Krishna. She had Aditi, creative power, written across her forehead, and it all went with an exhibition that was being shown of her work, working with Indian craftsmen.
And then Andrew invited Robyn to go to India, so it was Robyn's introduction to India.
I got off the plane in Bombay on a return trip from Sydney. I was with Michael, my partner. Journeyed up to Rajasthan, and Andrew Logan said we should experience Holi. And then we ended up in this village where everybody was being bombarded with buckets of coloured water. being poured over us, and such joy and gaiety that I haven't experienced ever before in my life. We'd put on white clothes, Jackson Pollock appeared everywhere, handprints, Rani Pink.
She met me in London. She came into India saying, I'm here. So I said, Robyn, why don't you go to Vrindavan? And it's a place where I knew friends, and I know that she would be in the heart of India, kind of India that not many tourists get to. She never came back. She just stayed.
They came along with me on this processional festival, which travels from one village to another village, with the full explosions of color, music, dance, dramas, flowers, and everything. And they were taken in. Their ecstasies exploded. They were really hooked.
I don't think she knew she was going to find all that stuff in India, but I'm sure she recognised it on that very, very first trip. When you look at the way they make each other up for the Indian festivals, it's not unlike what Robyn's been doing.
I thought, this is just fantastic. I spend hours trying to get this in the studio, and here it is, just happening every minute, changing. It's beautiful, the portraiture you can do at Holi. It's just instantaneous because in 1 second it'll change. So I'm looking at it from a Western viewpoint of seeing contemporary photography reenacted on the spot within traditional scenes. The next day we had to get on the train and go back, go straight from the train to the plane, straight from the plane to the catwalk, and I still had pink hair and still alive with all of this colour. So I can only say it was like a kaleidoscope, or like some fantastic jewel that I had entered into. It was just enough to say to myself, Europe doesn't interest me anymore. And I decided that I would go back and start documenting it seriously. I had 1 foot in India and 1 foot in London, and I made 13 visits in 5 years. Every time that I would go back there, I would be led on a pilgrimage. In London, of course, my studio turned into a very Indian environment. There was, things from Holi appearing everywhere. I was really interested in colour, in light. So I could see that India was really creeping into my consciousness. Then it became very, very difficult to really cope with advertising scenes. The politics of the country under Margaret Thatcher were really making a mark, and our mortgage went up and work dried up for freelance people. London was paling, really. In 1990, on this trip, Michael and I decided, why don't we come here and live? I had already embraced Hinduism and received an Indian name and experiencing the religious practices. I knew I was seriously fascinated in it. I was so bowled over with the culture of the region. So I said, well, I've made my decision. He was also quite willing to escape. So I decided to move. It was in May. The lilac was out in London. It was springtime, but it was fierce summer in India. The first month was probably the most difficult time I've ever spent in India, because one is grieving what one has left, and with an overcrowded ashram and scorpions running around the floor, and you could bake muffins on the marble. Well, I didn't know what I had done. I really did miss my friends. I really did think that I wasn't going to fit in for the first few months. It was really very difficult to understand that this was it. I think basically it was the heat. But then when I went into the temple space, I was absolutely mesmerised by the incredible spectacle that I was to photograph for a month. It was so hot that the camera backs wouldn't even let me get my roll of film out. They'd expanded and stuck. So I realised again that with mango shakes and various cooling devices, one can actually get through this and do it. Michael also adjusted really well. Had we not been together, I think it would have been a much more difficult step, you know, but being a couple is much easier to start a new life in a new country and a new culture, such as India.
It wasn't really till they came to India that this relationship with him working with video and film and sound and her working with stills, then the whole thing blossomed. One of the results was this beautiful film they made about Holi, and working as a team, they just did this, a beautiful movie.
Probably she made a very stupid mistake of giving up that very lucrative situation and come here and live without any source of income. But that idiocracy probably was a step towards self-realization, towards happiness and more completeness.
But the thing that interested me about the ashram where I'm living, that it was being shared by many, many international professors and universities as the place to actually study something to do with performance or music or traditional ritual. I landed in the best spot that I could have done because it is changing so rapidly now, and I look back and what I have photographed, really you aren't able to get it today. The elders of the villages I've been working in are no more. The middle class in India is on the move and the motor car has come, and so everything is really rapidly changing.
I think maybe it was a transition moment in Robyn's life. She was ready to move on to the next square, and I think the spontaneity of her photographs now are fabulous.
Well, where Robyn resides in Vrindavan, it is a city of traditions. She's trying to record these moments which will pass. They will pass and they will go and they might never come back again. As to a way of life, completely different, completely different. It was stepping out of one universe into another.
Being Krishna's birthplace, I always think of it as the Jerusalem of India. And I don't know how many thousands of Krishna temples there are here, but it's mind-boggling. All of the legends and stories begin here, and I think you could live here forever and still just scratch the surface.
I think Krishna spent no time in stealing Robyn Beeche's heart. So she is trapped. Trapped in the sense of when you are trapped in the arms of your lover,
Because he was the supreme lover, he could play the best prank and he could multiply himself and give every lady pleasure. Then it seemed like he was the Casanova of India, basically. So why not?
Through my father, Krishna sort of came alive and got manifested to Robyn.
It's a new thing in my life to have a guru, to actually surrender myself to somebody else's belief. To me, a guru is like having a parent, a grandparent, a doctor, a psychiatrist, everything rolled into one. It's not something that I thought I would do. I appreciated the depth of knowledge that I could draw upon in order to allay fears that I might have built up inside of myself over many, many years. I was never really very confident as a person because in my background and upbringing, it was more of a struggle for us to keep our heads above water. So we didn't even recognize that that was something that maybe other parents instilled in their children. But confidence built up in being recognized what I could do.
It's a lot of things that we've never experienced before, but there's a lot of kind of sense to it. It's become a way of life for her. She needs that now in her life. Robyn probably feels a deep connection with the family, and they do good works, you know.
It's a fulfillment that I didn't expect to happen. It's just come upon me. Because the knowledge is so abundant and their activities are so ongoing and their aesthetic behaviour is something which I love to document. Because I've been doing it for so long and because I produced a book from the ashram called Celebrating Krishna, people could see that, oh, well, over the years she has done all that documentation of what we're doing here. And I think that that has made me part of the establishment. Now, seva is service in Hindi, and it means that I work for no remuneration, and I don't expect ever to receive remuneration for what I do in India. Everything that I do here, it's coming from me, my heart, that I want to give it. It's like a fabulous barter system. I evade the criticism that might be thrown at me that, oh, look at the foreigner making money out of us. It makes me on the same level as anybody else. Now, only in India do people understand that. Holi in Braj happens at the first signs of spring. As soon as the spring is officially declared, you feel it building up and then it explodes into this real fantastic thing of colour. I've been surprised over many, many years at the intensity of the devotion and the passion in which Holi is played. And I think that is what is the addiction.
We should get on the road.
It's celebrated all over India, but it travels around the region over a period of about 2 weeks. You travel around it from village to events where certain things happen for certain reasons. It's basically still the same excitement and build-up of, I know what I want to do this year, which will be different to what I did last year. It's a bit like the Paris fashion shows. It's a bit like trying to get into Jean-Paul Gaultier or Issey Miyake. For years and years and years, you had to fight for your space on the edge of the catwalk, and I was the only woman. the press guys were really big guys, and they used to say, get in the middle of us and we'll just barge and go through this door. And so we'd go in. It's a bit like that, getting into Dowgie. This year we might not get in. All I can think of is my guru saying, no gain without pain. One of the great things about shooting Holi is the unexpected that might happen to you. Cartier-Bresson, I loved him growing up learning about photography because he was capturing a split second in life. Well, if there's any split second to capture, it's at Holi because it really is a fragment of an explosion of excitement and colour that can come at you from any direction. I used to dress as a boy so I could get right into the centre of things. It's like going into a wonderful movie.
As a scholar, she goes deeper. So she unravels its meaning and documents it. Also sees it as an anthropologist who is not just recording a fading phenomena or a changing phenomena, but deeply concerned about its reinvention. So she's making sure that this is there for the future, that the generation next will be able to have a point of reference, which I'm afraid is very ephemeral. It's all going, it's changing.
This archive I helped to create in 1992 when I came to live permanently in Vrindavan. My documentary sense of photography has really made me want to record as much as I can to portray really the feeling of how it was at that time. So we have wonderful documentation which can be accessed by various people who come here to study Braj culture. So the archive has many, many different uses and many scholars come. Michael did draws of videotape of seva that he undertook at the ashram. His travels up into the Himalayas changed his way of thinking. He also had developed a different spiritual path and was needing a different environment and location to fulfill the dreams of going along that path. In 2005, I was turning 60 and he was turning 50, so perhaps that is a time of readjustment in both of our minds. I think certainly from his point of view, he didn't predetermine his actions, but he decided that when a situation arose, he didn't refuse it, and he met somebody and went up in the Himalayas. I didn't realise that he was so intent on trying to find himself, perhaps through another soulmate or whatever. I was very convinced that I wanted to continue with the work that I had been doing, and if he was not interested in helping me to achieve, to go along that path or to be together on that path, then there's just no point.
And that was a strong emotional explosion. But spiritually, there's no difference. She's always had strength in her work. It was still there.
My staying power has been, to my benefit really, that I've got such a good archive. In photography here, I look for a quality of timelessness about it that will live on. Farlan is the absolute epiphany of shooting Holi because it is the most terrifying thing to watch. It is the most difficult thing to photograph in my life. The fire builds up to a huge crescendo before he runs. This man is probably the bravest man I've ever known because he's running into a wall of fire. The hairs on the back of your neck are standing up because I'm in so much fear that he's going to perish.
What she conveys is how the people themselves are responding to the religious moment of it. And I think as foreigners, we need to be very aware that what we see as fabulous theatre are in fact religious experiences for the people who are attending them. And Robyn is very good at that. She's very respectful. She understands where the people are coming from.
There are certain times when the gods are buried in flower petals, where everything comes to such a pinnacle. The five senses are just heightened to such a degree that you think that's the best I've ever experienced. But then something else will bowl you over. When you see people crying with happiness, then it can't help but reverberate. This is why people come to sacred places and doing pilgrimage.
Wow, that was such a good one.
Coming to India certainly changed her, I think, spiritually and emotionally, because something was lacking in her life in London, and in India it's wonderful. It's been given to her. And I think she's a very spiritual person, so naturally the work changes, it evolves.
She loves the subject and therefore treats it accordingly. She's showing all of us the richness of the Krishna tradition in a way that has not been documented before.
It is like anthropology because I put myself in exactly the same position and show through those pictures what is happening in this region. If I don't do it, it won't be done. It won't be there for others to enjoy or to learn from. The ashram director's son, Abhinav, has been fascinated by all of the cameras that I brought into the ashram on various trips over the years and has now turned into a fully fledged, fantastic photographer. And I can see how the archive is going to live on through his eyes.
It's the visual of what has always been the narrative. So when you repeat a legend or it's passed down year after year, it inevitably changes. You know, a little bit here, a little bit there. And I think Robyn's photographs document that.
I was really concentrating on looking for the faces that I know so well. And also, they're the ones who still control this whole event. They'll be saying things to the men opposite them that they only say at that particular time of year. So that's what I'm trying to convey in the photographs, is that the bond between the Barsana men and the Nandagaon men. These men I've been photographing for over 30 years. I'll probably shortlist about 25 from this village that to me show the emotional contact and rabble that goes on.
It's become a sense of mission. And it's not just about the ashram. It's now about her own environment. She's concerned about conservation in the whole of Vrindavan area, for it to be a city that is just crumbling in front of our eyes strikes her as something that is tragic and must not be allowed.
The pylons that were formed in the river was an idea in which an expressway cuts right through the middle of the river by a 16th century temple. It already was an existing law, but they had not got permission that you cannot build an expressway within 200 metres of a monument. The vibration of the cars on the expressway in front of the guts would have been diabolical. Lying in my bed, I could hear the cranes going 24 hours every day. So I raised enough money to keep paying the lawyers in the Supreme Court, and the building work was stayed. I'm not a radical activist. There are other people in Vrindavan who burn effigies of foreigners. I call that radical activism on the part of Indians. The amount of pilgrim traffic that we have here at festival times means that they leave their plastic bags, all of their waste behind. Michael really threw himself into a very long-term plan to resolve a lot of the problems. So Friends of Vrindavan was inaugurated in 1997 and has been battling on since then. There's all many, many layers and levels of what our work does. We're heavily involved into recycling of plastic, and now we're producing recycled paper. So there's a lot of areas that will become a legacy because it's completely run by Indians who are of like minds, who want to organise the mixed solid waste management in the town. At the moment, we have at least 50 people employed in this project. There's 80 tonnes at least generated in Vrindavan each day, so you can see that we're doing roughly 30% of the town's collection. I don't think that there's a burden in shouldering the NGO. Since my partner going off, I was really surprised that from that point of time, all of a sudden, my previous life took off and culminated in exhibitions, which culminated in a book and many other exhibitions. Basically enjoying the fruits of my labour.
In Australia, she's just being recognised. I mean, in the last few years.
The work that she was doing, documenting the different festivals, particularly Holi, how much that is changing. So already in 25, 30 years, that work has already got a sort of historical importance. And then you look back to the 80s to see the importance of that early work. I think it's a continuum for Robyn, and that sort of love of beauty is all through the work, but it just manifests a little bit differently these days. Her work in India is seen very much in terms of the service that she does to the ashram where she lives, and which is what gives it its vitality, I think. That image of the elephant is a wonderful, iconic image. It really sticks in your head. I can't get it out. It's so painterly, it's so extraordinary.
And this wonderful exhibition she's done as a curator, considering the restrictions, really, how they exhibit things, and I mean, she did remarkably well. I hope this will be a future thing for her, because she's very good at it.
Her work is starting to be seen in India in quite a lot of galleries, and the fact that people are putting those two parts of her life together, I think, is very important.
It's come to Robyn later in her life because she never sought notoriety. And she's now being collected, of course, and the book has been produced.
Robyn will go on working as intensely as she can. The work speaks for itself, and actually, that's all that matters. It's the same with any of us that do work that we believe in. Our work will make us sacrifice everything.
She has what it takes to be an artist. Her imagination flies, her emotions are pure, yet her head's all full of method. Her work has a great pedagogic value.
When a person like Robyn is capturing that divine moment of creativity as an act of love, the photograph becomes the conduit for the real experience.
She loves the life, I think. She's found her soul place.
It was a parallel to my life in UK. It was a spectacle, it was theatrical, there was a presence of the unknown.
You see a photograph by her and your heart goes into the photograph. She's dedicated her life to it.
I live my life with whatever comes along, comes along. If it's a plane ticket to Australia, if it's in a temple in 10 minutes' time, I'm just free. As long as I can walk and hold a camera, I'll be shooting. Who knows?